So I actually wanted to start by talking about dating life and husband. I want to go back to when you're out somewhere and somebody comes up and says, actor Taye Diggs wants you to come to his table.
Yeah, no, that's just a very fun way to start this interview. Gosh, I was 21, living, I think any like young adolescent, like, young adult dream, dancing for ABT, experiencing like being young in this lively, diverse city, and I love to go out and be around people and kind of not the atmosphere I'm used to being in and day out at ABT, which really in reality, I was the only Black woman at ABT for the first decade of my career, so the majority of my time, 8 hours a day, I'm spent in this building with only white people. So like any chance I'm like, could be out and on the town. So
well, and that's what I read too. It seemed like because of the commitment to your craft, it really was kind of at the expense of social life.
Right.
You were telling a story in the book about how, as of like senior year in high school, you hadn't had your first kiss yet.
Oh
even.
No, I was really underdeveloped, I think, in my maturity and just life experiences, and also just this fear of like going down the wrong path, coming from the circumstances I grew up in. It was like, I'm gonna stay on the straight and narrow. And I think I reacted the opposite of how a lot of children might respond in that situation. I just kind of was like even more introverted and afraid of ending up like a lot of people I saw around me. So getting to New York City, it was this sense of freedom in a different way for the first time. Like I was going out and like meeting artists and people from different walks of life, and then it was actually Taye Diggs who walked up to me and asked if I would come to his table because his cousin was interested. And I was like, I didn't know who he was at the time.
And you're thinking what?
And I was like, who's your cousin? And he pointed to this guy that I had actually been eyeing all night. I was like, I'll come right over. And the rest is history. I mean, it's pretty amazing that he was my first boyfriend. There was a connection, I think, both of us being from California, like West Coast, being biracial. He listened really well and had like a different kind of like response and reaction to hearing that I was a classical dancer. His mother was on the board of directors of San Francisco Ballet when he was younger. He actually danced in San Francisco Ballet's Nutcracker when he was a kid. I mean, he has no dance experience, even though he teases me all the time. And it's like, remember when I learned at San Francisco Ballet? I'm like, you did an audition to be like a mouse, not quite the training of a classical dancer. But there was just a different bond and understanding and respect that I don't think I'd ever experienced.
He said the first time he saw you that he was gonna marry you.
Yes.
What made you realize he was the one?
I think it was the consistency. He left the following morning after we met at this nightclub to go back to Atlanta where he was living. He was in law school there. And it was his commitment to staying connected, like talking on the phone. We'd spend hours talking on the phone, and it was just like a real genuine care. The conversations we were having were, about our careers and about things of substance. And I think it was just timing too. I was ready.
You gave birth to your first child, yes. A son, April of 22. What's that experience been like for you?
It's eye-opening. It makes me look at relationships in my life so different.
How so?
There's like, first of all, just looking at my own mother and looking at my parents, looking at my husband's mother and the way that we were raised, and just like, how did they do it? We are in a loving marriage and are very supportive of one another, and it's hard.
And you have the means. And
we have the means, and you think about so many people that didn't have what we have, and it's really commendable to think about, it just makes me look at all of my relationships and with a new kind of respect and light, and maybe understanding of why people are the way they are. And there's just like a different openness and love in my heart.
How do you think your upbringing impacted how you are as a mother?
I think it's given me this balance of, I know what I want Jackson to have and what he deserves, but I also want him to be grounded and know that not everything should just be handed to him. Me and all of my siblings have worked so hard for, the stability we now have in our lives. I want him to know where I come from, where my husband, came from, and that, that to appreciate, the things you have and to be respectful. And it's just exciting.
Well, and what's funny is we've been fortunate to feature a lot of, really successful people for episodes of the show, and that's kind of an ongoing topic we'll talk about, where you want to create opportunities for your kids that are endless and that you have earned the right to do, but the balance between that and avoiding raising a little brat.
Exactly. Yeah. It's on our minds every day.
Really?
I mean, he's only 6 months old and we're still like, do we see it coming out? Do we see a little brat coming out? Like, what do we need to do?
Yeah. How about the hardest part so far of motherhood?
I think it's just not having guilt. I'd say that's the hardest thing. I went back to not dancing work, but everything else that I'm doing, pretty immediate. But there's just this, sense of I can do more, or I'm not doing enough, or I'm going and I'm missing, one of his feedings or something. And I think that's been the hardest part for me, is just knowing that, me and my husband are doing our best, and that we care so much. And that's what should matter most, is the love that we're giving him, and just trying not to get caught up in the guilt.
More kids?
Yes, I would love to. I mean, I'm 40 now, so, women have children into their 40s now. But I come from a big family. I'm one of 6 children, and I've always wanted to have my child to have a sibling or siblings. It was one of the best things about my childhood, was having 5 best friends right there with me every day.
Conscious decision to have kids later in life?
Yes and no. I feel this is when it was supposed to happen. But it's also really difficult as a classical dancer, as an athlete, as a woman. And so, if I were to have had a child when I was a soloist at ABT, I don't think I would have become a principal dancer, which is terrible to think about.
Why do you say that?
It's you're looked at differently. Maybe you're not taking your career seriously. A lot of dancers will, maybe wait until they become a principal dancer, but I wasn't promoted to principal until I was 32 years old. And then I had to actually be a principal for a couple of years before, stepping back and having a child. So it's...
To what extent do you think it's important that perception changes?
I mean, it's so difficult. It's difficult to be a working woman. And I mean, that perception absolutely should change. I think that it's, you learn so much by living your life, and you become a better artist by having all these experiences. And so there's this kind of double-edged sword where in professional companies, they expect you to be so committed to your craft and not have these outside experiences. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we want you to be this artist, but you have no experiences. So like, what are you drawing from? So, I think that it's important that we're treated like adults in the classical ballet world, which is rare. We're often treated like children and called boys and girls as adults. There's just like a respect level that you can be responsible and have a child or have these other, outside experiences and still be committed to your craft.
The time off. We were talking about it a little bit before the interview, but you wrote in your memoir a while back, quote, "When I can't dance, I feel lost." Describe that feeling.
Throughout my childhood, I was like searching for a place to belong. And thinking about it, like, we're here at a Boys and Girls Club, and I think that was the first place that I started to feel a sense of like stability and consistency in my life. Coming to the club every day, having adults around that, you know, cared about whether or not my homework was going to get done, you know, the mentoring and the tutoring. And then finding ballet, it really gave me a sense of purpose and in a way I'd never experienced. So that just kind of became like the stability in my life. So, you know, even as an adult, when I would take time off, it was like my center of gravity was like gone.
And how would that come out in you when you would be off?
Yeah. You know, when I don't have like this sense of control over like a situation or my body in particular, I don't know, get like agitated and just not grounded and not myself. Just taking a ballet class, that like ritual of taking the same ballet class over and over again. It's a sense of you know, like practice, like yoga or, you know, breathing, meditation that it can give you, and just coming back into your body day after day.
So then these past 3 years
have
been like what for you?
These past 3 years is the longest that I've gone without dancing at the level I'm used to. And it's kind of been replaced with other things though. Of course, my son coming into my life, there's like a different focus. Mm-hmm. There's part of myself that is not feeling like whole because I haven't been dancing the way that I need to. Initially, I was really thrilled to stop, to take a break.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, okay. Initially. You know, it's been a long run for me. And, you know, I think about a lot of dancers who are principal dancers and typically will step into that role pretty young, you know, in their 20s. You know, a company, an artistic director, artistic staff will see potential in a dancer, they'll nurture them, but the point is to get them fairly young so they can really become this principal artist and grow into this position. But
and correct me if I'm wrong, the schedule's supposed to ease up some once you become a principal dancer. Yeah.
You're not on stage every night. You know, your rehearsals are intense, but they're shorter kind of spurts. And that my whole experience was like the opposite of what's typical. And so, you know, at 32 years old and you know, having had that run of working towards this goal for that long, it's exhausting. And, you know, with the pressures of being African American, of being the first, I got to a point where right before the pandemic, I ended up with a back injury and had to pull out of my final performances before the company, you know, before there were no more live performances. And I was ready. You know, I think I was at a point where I was already starting to think about, you know, like what the end looks like of a professional career with American Ballet Theater. So I kind of got used to not being in that routine of things. But there wasn't that same sense of groundedness throughout this time because I haven't had that. In a rehearsal season, we're in the ballet studio taking class every morning from 10:15 to 11:45, and then we rehearse from noon until 7. And for the majority of my career, I wasn't getting breaks. You know, you get a 5-minute break on the hour to use the bathroom, get a drink of water. And then during a performance season, you're in the studio from like 10:30 to 5:30, and then performances start at 7:30, and that can go till like 11 o'clock. It's more physical than I think a lot of people realize. And all of that training is, you know, of course, going towards becoming a character, telling story through movement, keeping our technique refined, but it's also about making it look effortless. And I think that's why people are, you know, assume that it's so simple, because we train really hard to make it look that way.
So I understand you might be starting to get a little anxiety at the thought of going back in January?
A lot. I have many nights that I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to be ready, even though I have like really a year before I plan to be back on stage. But I have those moments where I wake up and I'm just like, it's just never enough time. But I think all dancers feel that way. Even when you're in the best shape of your life, I look back on times, I look at photos and videos and I'm like, what was I thinking when I was like, I'm not ready, I'm so not in shape. And I'm like, wow, you know, but I do have that anxiety right now. And I think that once I'm just take that first step and really get back in the studio and working towards, you know, the goal, I'll have less of it.
And then by the time you're on stage in front of an audience, it'll have been almost 4 years, right? Or somewhere upwards of?
My last live performance was December of 2019.
So you had said how a single day off can cause your muscles to forget what your mind knows by heart.
The ballet technique is so incredible. I mean, just the idea, the thought of standing on point on one leg and balancing all of your weight. It takes years and years of practice, but it's a life, you know, commitment to be able to get to this place. And you know, you take one day off and those tiny little muscles that people don't even think, I mean, these aren't the big muscles that you think about when you're in the gym and you're using, these are the smallest little muscles underneath and between your toes, those types of muscles and tendons and ligaments that you take one day off. And of course your mind remembers exactly how it should feel, but your body so easily forgets.
I wonder if, you know, when you get going again, if there's any chance you could just be like, screw this, been there, done that, had unbelievable success, ready to move on.
I don't know. You know, as an athlete, really, anything can happen to your body. You know, of course you have control over a lot of things and in getting rest and taking care of, you know, training correctly and all that. But in the end, like, you don't have that much control over something happening to you, like physically. And so I think I've always had this mindset of really enjoying everything I'm doing in that moment. So I feel like I've done everything. I really have. Yeah. And then some. You know, it's a bonus to people to go on stage and do roles that you've been doing for years and continue to grow in them. Like, that's an incredible privilege. But I've done it all. Right. And you know, I'm so content and happy with my career, but you know, I would love to be able to give back to the audiences who have supported me. You know, in these final years, I'm going to dance forever. Let's just say that. But in terms of being in a company the caliber of American Ballet Theater, that's a big lift. So, you know, looking towards the end of that. I feel good about where I am, but I think it's about a celebration.
I know when people used to ask you about the future, you would always say rehearsal.
Yes.
What will make you realize when you're ready to be done?
I think once I'm back on stage, like I'll have more. I think it'll make more sense to me. But I feel like I've always looked at the company like as a whole, and not me as like an individual in the company. And so, you know, from my own experience of being a young dancer, and there's just never enough opportunities for young dancers, and you have guest artists and dancers who've been you know, as principal dancers for years and years, some decades, and they continue to do these roles. And I've just always felt like it's going to come to a point where it's like you have to pass the baton to the next person. For the good of the culture, of the morale of the company, like I feel like that's always been something in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. And right now, you know, I've been away from the company for 3 years, and it's a different company. It's a young company. I'm one of the oldest, you know, members in this company.
Which is crazy to think.
Which is crazy. Yeah. But you know, it's a circle of dance life, right. And I think it's okay to let go and give opportunity to the next generation.
I wanted to ask about playing through injury as well. In one moment, specifically when you're playing Firebird.
Right. I've had severe injuries throughout my career, as any other professional athlete does.
And if you could rattle off as many as you can think of.
Okay. I've had so many sprains. Like I remember one of the worst sprains I had. I'm not even exactly sure what happened because I was supposed to have surgery and ended up they were like, oh, you're walking, it's fine, you don't need the surgery. But there's a muscle on the side of my foot that completely went away in my left ankle because of an attachment or something that was ripped and was never attended to. So I think that's the reason that I have ended up with the shin injury, because I didn't have the right support on that side of my leg. But I've had a stress reaction in my lower lumbar where I was out for a year. I was wearing a back brace from my rib cage to my hip for 8 months, 23 hours a day. I was 19 years old and I had only been a professional for a year, and they told me, I don't know if you're ever gonna be able to really, do an arabesque or arch your back in the way that you need to. I did, I was able to. I healed completely.
And that was a reoccurring theme, doctors telling you
that
you
I won't.
might not be able to do something again, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've learned so much throughout these injuries, and it's been an important lesson to get more than one opinion, and trust yourself and the knowledge you have of your body, because you know your body best. The most severe was the injury that I had in 2012. Preparing to perform the Firebird. It had been a long season of learning and rehearsing principal roles, doing performances on tour, and not resting enough. That fear of, this is my one shot. I can't take a day off, which is not smart. Reality of it, you have to rest.
But that was a hugely consequential role for you for multiple reasons.
Yes, there were several of those roles happening that year, but the Firebird in particular, to be the lead, the first principal dancer in a full-length classical work as a Black woman at American Ballet Theater. And so, it got to a point by the time we were at Lincoln Center, which, yes, I did the performances on the road. The first was at home in Orange County, California. But I needed to get on the stage at Lincoln Center at the Metropolitan Opera House. And as a Black woman, what that meant was huge. So that was kind of the goal. Even though the Firebird was happening halfway through the season, I still had a full rest of the season to finish. And I didn't make it through the rest of the season. I did one performance of the Firebird, and it was the most unbelievable experience of having more than half of the audience at the Met full of Black and brown people and young people. That we'd never seen that at the Met. I remember one of the cleaning women that had worked at the Met for like 40 years, and she came to me and she asked if it was my family in the audience. And I was like, well, I don't have 2,500 family members that I know of. They're all coming to support me. Because it was like, to see that much diversity was unbelievable. But
it stopped, the applause stopped the show on
yeah,
multiple occasions.
it was something that I'd never experienced before. And it was so much bigger than me. And then to go from that extreme high to, the following morning, I went into the artistic director's office and I said, I'm in so much pain I can't perform anymore. And no one knew the extent of how much pain I was in, because I knew that if I let them know, they would have taken me out of rehearsals, they would have taken me from performances, I would have found out the severity of my injury much earlier, and I would have never done the Firebird, and I never would have been promoted to principal dancer. So I knew the risk I was taking and why, and even at that point, it was like, if that's the one show I get to do as a principal dancer, with that title role, that's enough. And the impact that it might have had on that audience that night, and the possibilities of knowing that could happen again. But I ended up finding out I had 6 stress reactions in my tibia, and 3 of them were dreaded black line fractures, which are almost full breaks through the bone. It was bad, like really, really bad. And
Did it surprise even you?
Yes.
Okay.
I did not realize it was that bad. I thought maybe I had a stress fracture, but not that many. And I was told by, I think, 6 or 7 doctors that I would never dance again. So that was pretty devastating to see that many doctors and for them to tell you, or give you options that just weren't practical, realistic to continue on. And the last doctor I saw was the one I stopped with, and that was Dr. Martin O'Malley. And he is a surgeon for professional athletes. And he said, "Oh, I see this injury all the time with football players and basketball players, and I can put a plate in, and we'll have you back on stage." And I was on stage in 8 months.
So tell about this really loud, very angry rap music that you'll sing along to when injured.
That's so funny. I think that I think there's been a connection, well, for me, connection to music my whole life, which is how I made that entry into dance.
Yeah, I get that, but that wouldn't necessarily be somebody who's aware of Misty Copeland wouldn't necessarily expect to see you jamming out
right,
to that.
I know. But it's been like having a wide variety of music to be able to express yourself through.
But I heard you go to that when injured or when time off.
I love hip hop and rap, and I listen to such a big variety of music. But I mean, there were times in my younger years I remember just finding myself and listening to a lot of Eminem and kind of having that outlet. I don't know about angry, but there's just something that, even if I'm preparing for like a Swan Lake, where people might assume that I'm listening to like Tchaikovsky or something before, and it's like whatever mood I'm in. There's a lot of like hip hop or like a lot of Drake like before a Swan Lake performance that might get me like hyped up. But it's a range of music that allows for me to express myself and prepare to express myself on stage that just activates something.
In contrast to what you'd listen to when your family was watching sports back in the day and you'd go into your bedroom, right?
Mariah Carey.
Yeah, a big Mariah Carey fan.
Huge, yeah. Having that that connection to someone who I felt I could relate to, being a biracial girl, not coming from a lot of instability like, she did growing up. And I don't think I recognized until I was older, like the power of representation. And that's what I was seeing when I looked at Mariah Carey and her success and being given an opportunity and reaching this level of success. It was really impactful.
Sports psychologist. What made you decide to go?
I think that the conversations that I've had with my husband throughout, the time I've known him, it's not kind of pushing things under the rug and really facing fears you have, holes in, your kind of belief in yourself or understanding of why things happen. And it got to a point where I started to have anxiety around performing. And I've just felt it was the smart thing to do to speak to a professional and to get tools to how, understanding how to deal with those things. And
which a lot of elite athletes have.
Yeah. And I've never ever had like the connection to the stage and performing and me, it was like the opposite of what a lot of people feel. Like there has never been stage fright. It's always been a sense of comfort, like in this bubble where no one could touch me and I could just express myself through movement. But got to a point where being put on this kind of trajectory to be the first and the pressures of this white ballet world that I felt never was going to accept me. It was like no matter what I do on the stage, I'm not going to win everyone over. And that started to develop anxiety in me around my performances.
Some would probably think that as you've had more success, the criticism or the noise would maybe go
honestly,
away,
no,
but for
no.
you, it got to you more, right?
Yeah, I think that it was like a combination of not only my success within the ballet community and the ballet world, but to go beyond it and to go outside of it, with endorsement deals, books, speaking engagements, the ballet world's not used to seeing that. And, it's like what is my commitment to this craft and the purity of what a typical principal dancer looks like. And it's like, I don't fit any of those molds. And the reason that I do have these opportunities outside of ballet are because of my career as a classical dancer. And I'm doing all of this to benefit, to bring more people to ballet, to diversify it. And that's how you do it. You have to go outside of the small, isolated bubble that the ballet world has existed in for forever.
What did you learn from talking
Going.
to? Yeah.
It's important, I think, for me to check in like daily, especially before performances, and get a sense of like why I'm feeling anxious, like getting to the root of what it is, and then deciding how real it is. Is that something that's in my mind, or how important it is that I need to give it that much focus?
And
It's
like,
kind
what's
of,
an example of that?
I went through a period where I was anticipating who was going to be in the audience and what they were going to say, like what blog they were going to write. Literally, like every step I was taking on the stage, it was like, is this right? Is this good enough? I'm, in the midst of preparing to do the 32 fouettes, which is one of the most difficult technical feats in the classical technique and repertoire. And in the middle of preparing for this, I'm thinking about what some critic is going to write, and then completely losing my focus and not being able to physically accomplish what I needed to on the stage. Like that was beyond anything I'd ever experienced up until that point. And so to be able to step back and just be present and in the moment and stop getting ahead of myself.
You wrote in your book when you were younger and growing up, I think I was born worried. There wasn't a day I didn't feel some kind of anxiety. My panic would begin from the moment I woke up.
Yes.
How so?
Yeah, this fear of not knowing what was going to come day in and day out in my childhood. Whether it was my mom waking us up in the middle of the night and saying, like, we're leaving your dad, we're moving, and not knowing where we were going, not having a consistent place to stay, or knowing if we were going to have food on the table. All of these things just created this severe anxiety inside of me. I would sometimes go to sleep with my school clothes on, with this fear that like I wasn't gonna wake up and have enough time to get ready, or I'd need to be at school an hour early, and just like I needed a sense of control.
And you would map the route out right before like a school year?
I would rehearse going to school. I would have my mom take me to school and walk from classroom to classroom to make sure I knew where all the classrooms were going to be, how much time it was going to take me to get from one place to the other. It was really just, this young, insecure girl, like looking for control in some way, because I didn't have any control over anything that was happening in my life. And it's like a scary feeling, also being, a middle child, and there was just so much chaos, and I didn't really have anything that allowed me to find who I wanted to be until I started dancing.
You wrote, for a little girl who lived in terror of making a mistake, of being embarrassed or criticized in front of others, the stage was somehow an oasis. Mm-hmm. What made it that for you?
When you look out into the audience, you can't see anyone's faces. It's just a sea of like darkness, of black, but you feel the energy. So there was something so safe to me about like not seeing people's like reactions, but just feeling the love, like whether it was the applause or just an energy you literally feel from the audience, from a group of people being in the room. And then, the fact that no one could say anything to me. Like there, you know, it was like I was just up there and no one could do or say anything. Whether that was, you know, you get coached and you train and you have the coaches or ballet masters and mistresses that are saying stuff to you while you're dancing and yelling out things, or there's constant feedback. But when you get on stage, it all goes away and you're responsible for yourself. And there was something so empowering about that, to be able to be responsible, be in control, and do something I loved. Being able to express myself through a non-verbal art form. It was the perfect fit for me.
How did a Lifetime movie impact you when you were 7?
My mother grew up dancing. She was a professional cheerleader for the Kansas City Chiefs football team. My sister was like on the drill team at the middle school. So I had a connection to movement, but I didn't really understand what that looked like and what it was I was drawn to. But I was attracted to gymnastics. So whenever the Olympics, you know, would come on TV, I was watching floor exercises. And then this Lifetime movie came on about Nadia Comaneci, who was the first to score a perfect 10. And there was something about her story that was so incredible to me, to see these amazing ups and downs, but this connection that she always had to gymnastics. And but looking back, the floor exercises, the way they move, it was so similar to classical dance. Though I'd never seen classical dance, but I was drawn to that. And that just kind of like opened up my mind to what was possible.
I heard you sat for a week observing class before.
Yeah, it might have been more than that, but yeah.
Okay, before you first participated in it.
Yeah.
And then you're at the Boys and Girls Club,
Yes.
and you quit after your first class, or think about quitting.
Yeah, I've had just gotten on the drill team. This was like the biggest thing I'd ever done in my life. To decide I wanted to be on this dance team where you were putting yourself out there in front of people performing. And then I not only auditioned for the drill team, I auditioned for the captain of the drill team and made it and was named captain. So I finally found something that was just enough outside of my comfort zone. So then when I was asked to take this free ballet class from the drill team coach, she thought I had a lot of potential. It was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is so far outside of my comfort zone. And the teacher, Cynthia Bradley at the time, you know, she just kept pushing me, you know, she's like, it's okay that you don't have the right attire. That was another thing too. It's like not fitting in, not having a leotard and tights and slippers and being on a basketball court. I was like, this just all feels wrong. So I sat in the bleachers for weeks. And every class, you know, Cynthia would come over and just say like, just come down one more seat on the bleachers and like just get closer and closer. And it was scary. It took going to her ballet school, where she gave me a full scholarship. And once I was in the studio, was in the proper attire, was surrounded by other dancers, and I was looking in the mirror, and I felt beautiful, and I felt in control. That's when it all clicked and changed.
And the rest, I guess, is kind of history, but you were quickly viewed as a prodigy, but you started late, and because you started late, there were steps or productions that you were unfamiliar with. How would that come out in you?
You know, even up until I had been a professional for like 5 years, I was still like finding holes in my technique, in my knowledge of classical dance and the repertoire. And there's no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts in dance. I think that there's always time to catch up, but it's not something that you can get done quickly. It's going to take years. So starting at 13 years old, 4 years later, I was already a professional, and there was still vocabulary I didn't know. I mean, it's a new language. It's
Right.
all in French. It's literally a new language you're speaking, and I remember still learning to do steps when I was already dancing at the Metropolitan Opera House with American Ballet Theater.
And I believe at various points in your life, your peers have been resentful that you'd get opportunities that may not be afforded to them. Tell about this book that you wrote in China while you were like over there.
Did Layla tell you about this? Wait. I don't even know if I remember the details of it.
I heard it was sitting on your bookshelf for a long time at your old apartment.
I don't even know if I remember. I mean, I was all about like
you guys were like getting
documenting.
beaten up on by the
yes,
other
we
dancers.
documented
Really.
everything that happened with us. My best friend Layla, we definitely found commonality in being different. And
who's now your partner?
Who's now my partner
your production
with my
company.
production company. But both of us not coming from backgrounds where we had family members or people who understood the classical ballet world, and Layla's first generation, American, and being Lebanese, Cuban, and Persian, and me, being black and white, and we just had this connection and bonded, and I'm so happy that I had her. But yes, our first tour with American Ballet Theater to China, we definitely, I think it was just a part of the hazing, but we definitely were bullied and made fun of. I remember being told by a dancer, a male dancer in the company, just being made fun of because everything, again, it all comes back to this idea of needing control over everything. And I would come to class every day impeccable, my hair, there wasn't a hair out of place. It was pulled back so tight, everything that I wore. I was never that dancer that had on the holy leg warmers and the shirt hanging off my shoulder. That wasn't me. Mm-hmm. And I was called a bunhead, which as a young person, that's you're a part of this cool squad, and you're one of the kids that is walking around with their feet turned out and the bun in their head. But once you become a professional adult, it's like calling someone a nerd, or Mm-hmm. And I remember being called a bunhead over and over again, and people coming up to me and pretending to spray shellac on my hair because it looked so hard and pulled back with hairspray, and being, not knowing the protocol and what it is to be in a professional company where as a young person, you have to wait until everyone in the company finds their place at the bar for you to find a place. So sometimes, a principal dancer may come in 10 minutes late and you have to give up your spot at the bar, and you're holding on to the edge of a chair. It's pretty ridiculous,
Mm-hmm. But it got happened to you guys then. Especially,
yeah. And we were apprentices in the company, so we were the lowest on the totem pole, and treated accordingly. So it was a lot. I'm just glad that I had Layla in that time to go through it with me.
You're he's trying to come up with some stuff you haven't been asked about before.
I know that threw me. I was like, what?
Your mom.
Yeah.
You said her childhood was kind of filled with pain.
Yeah.
In what ways?
My mother's adopted. She never knew really where she came from. She was raised by two older parents that died when she was pretty young, and raised by her adopted cousins and aunts. I think never really having a true connection to any group of people, never really having a family. Her mother was an alcoholic. She dealt with, she was married very young, and he was murdered, and there was just a lot of searching for family. And I think she created that by having 6 children, made a family for herself. But there was a lot of abuse and instability and movement in her life, and then eventually in ours.
You think that upbringing impacted her how?
Well, I think that she was just, like I was saying, just constantly searching for a sense of family and consistency and love. And I think that's why she married so many times. And it's just always searching for what she didn't have growing up, and I guess creating that on her own by having all of us.
And you said you always loved her, but you didn't really understand her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that as an adult, it's easier to look back and say something like that.
Right.
Because, I think it's understanding who you are first, and I don't think she ever did that. And I think that it's before having a family, And I don't think she had the liberty to, you know. I think that as a young person without a support structure or system around her, she was just kind of trying to do all of this on her own. I didn't always understand the constant moving ahead rather than stopping, standing still, and examining oneself. When you have stability and you have a support system around you, it's easier to say that and be able to look at yourself, which I have as an adult.
Explain what would happen where she would fear for her life, and essentially you guys would have to immediately pack up and move on.
It happened many times, and we'd never know when it was going to happen. But yeah, whether it was, physical abuse in the house, which happened on many occasions with different husbands.
And you would witness that?
Yes, witness it. A lot of verbal and emotional abuse as well. And I remember very vividly, being like in the middle of the night or something, and someone coming and a car pulling up, and all of us just taking what we could and just jumping in the car, and out of fear of our lives, just not being in a safe situation, and having to kind of go hide out for a little while in other people's homes and sleep on the floor, staying in motels, and just a lot of chaos in that way.
One time, I believe you heard gunshot and then a thud.
I must have been 14 years old, and we were staying at, we would call them aunt and uncle, but they were not related to us, friends of my mom's from somewhere, and they lived in downtown LA, and we were sleeping, all of us kids were sleeping in their living room on the floor, and it just was not a safe area, and there was a drive-by shooting, and I ended up with this guy bleeding on our porch and trying to help him, and just things I shouldn't have seen. There were guns in the house, and I remember my brother, finding one and pointing it at me, and just the thought of just no security. I felt that a lot as a child, and that was, just added to the anxiety that I had.
What was kind of the hardest part of life when your mom applied for food stamps?
It was around 12 or 13 years old, and that was at our lowest point, on food stamps, not having a home. From day to day, it was like, are we gonna have enough money to pay this weekly rent at a motel? But it was also just like this shame and this sense of having a secret for most of my childhood. So I never had close friends. My siblings are my best friends, and it was just this fear of people finding out and judging, and so I just kind of kept everyone at a distance.
The shame being circumstances?
My circumstances. The shame being that I didn't have a home, that we didn't have food, that we were on food stamps, that we lived. We didn't even live in San Pedro where I was going to school. We lived far away. I had to take the public bus. All of these things that it's just not a good feeling to have secrets like that. And even when I started training with Cynthia, she didn't even know the extent of my home circumstances, and wouldn't find out until I actually told her I had to quit dancing, and she drove me home and saw that I was living in a motel, and that was when she invited me to live with her.
Before she found that out, just to give her context, how did she really build your self-confidence?
When I met Cindy, I'd never met someone who was so free in her body, in herself, and open and accepting of me. I never felt judged by her. She was just a support, a friend, a mentor, all of these things to me, and a ballet teacher that was just so open to giving as much of herself to me to get me to where I needed to be professionally.
Did she make you feel beautiful, and that you'd be performing for kings and queens, and all this stuff kind of zeroed in
Yes.
terms of her focus on you in a way that
I'd never had.
Yeah.
Being one of 6 children, there's not a lot of focus individually, that I experienced, and And she definitely gave me that in a way I'd never had, but also had these grand predictions of what my life and career would be like. Of course, I think at the time I just thought she was a little like quirky, and I was like, oh, like that's cool that she's saying all of that, but I don't know how realistic it is. But to have someone that had that much belief in you was something I needed.
And so your mom kind of says, look, because of how far away ballet is, it just is going to have to stop.
Yeah.
Take me to the conversation that Cindy had with your mom at the motel and what you remember from that.
Yeah, I remember just being this ball of tension on the way home, just waiting for that moment when we turned into the Sunset Inn, and Cindy realized that's where I was living. And so as soon as we turned into the parking lot, I ran out of the car. Like, I didn't even say bye. It was just like, I'm so mortified. I'm never gonna see this woman again, but I'm so mortified, and I just want to go inside and like bury myself.
And what was it about that place that made you feel that way?
I mean, what child wants to show that they're living in this dingy old motel, like off the side of the highway? We all living in one room, and it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing, and I don't recall what I had told her up until that point. I don't know if I had lied to her and told her we were living in an apartment or what it was, but she had no idea. So I went upstairs and kind of just went back into my shell, like the person I was before dance. I sat in the corner and was just like zoned out. And a couple of minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and Cindy had turned around. She had left and was just kind of in shock with what she just witnessed, and then decided to turn back around, and she spoke with my mom for a while, and my mom turned to me and said, Cindy asked if you would want to go and live with her so you can continue training. And it was shocking, and I was like, yes.
Really not a doubt in your mind?
Not at all. It was like the thought of not dancing again, it was like this hole already, in what my life would be. I'd become so attached to it, and it started to develop as a person in ways I never had before. Mm-hmm. I was actually stunned that my mom let me go. So, I took the few clothes I had and put it in my book bag and left.
As a kid, when there's that transition, one would think it would be really traumatic, but I believe that was the first transition you had that was not.
Yeah. It was the most loving, supportive, warm environment. Like, from the moment I stepped into their house for the first time, again, I just feel like I spent so much of my life feeling judged or waiting for judgment to come, and I never ever felt that in their house. They made me feel like I was a part of the family always. There was a lot of protection, when it came to what I'd experienced. There was a lot of trauma. I mean, even when I turned 16, it was towards the end of the time that I was training with Cindy and was living with her family, and there was a big court case that ended up ensuing, and my mom was trying to get a restraining order against the Bradleys. I was starting the process of getting emancipated, so it blew up into something bigger than I ever imagined. It became a national story, on talk shows, and it was really traumatic. And so it was around that time that, my 16th birthday, and I think that everyone was doing their best to protect me and to, not talk about things that were happening in my life that would kind of bring up that trauma again. And it was, I was a really fragile girl at the time, and so many, I would get these severe migraines throughout my childhood.
Which you don't have anymore.
I don't have anymore.
Yeah. Because you were concerned that it would could flare up when you got to New York and prevent you from competing.
There was this fear of, I would get these migraines and I would literally be bedridden for a night, throwing up, and I just couldn't be in light. And the thought of going and becoming a professional and having that, what if this happens? I can't just not go on stage. But so much of the stress, it was all connected to the stress I had as a child. On my 16th birthday, it flared up, and we were I had a couple of parties, but there was one at the new ballet school that I was attending, and and everyone kind of, they didn't know me, but they all came together to, welcome me in this place, and they knew what I had been through. It was all over every paper and all over TV, and I ended up in the back room with a severe migraine, sleeping in the dark, and while everyone was out there eating cake and celebrating my birthday.
What's your opinion now on what transpired during that period with the emancipation and court case and all of that?
I don't know. I feel like things happened so quickly, and there wasn't a lot of time spent thinking about what the repercussions could be on me. And, if things didn't go smoothly, which they didn't, I think that it was just kind of a panic to keep me training, a fear of if I went back home and stayed with my mom, who knows what would have happened with me in my career, in those environments, and how would I continue my training? And so I think it was just a panic, from the Bradleys, from me. And then I understand why my mother would react that way. I can't imagine being a mother now, being in a situation where you felt like you, didn't have control over your own child.
Because your mom essentially said, need to come home.
Yes.
And then Cindy picks you up one morning and says, not taking you to school.
Yeah, you're going home. Yeah, it was a complicated time, and I eventually ended up back home with my mom, and she eventually got an apartment in San Pedro, and I continued to train at another school. It took me like a decade just to be able to say the words and revisit that time without getting so emotional. But yeah, I've had 20 plus years to heal and also recognize that it's not my fault. I think when I first was coming out of that situation, that I felt a lot of guilt, whether it was that I put my family through that, that we were all kind of exposed in a way.
You felt guilt.
Yeah, that it was like this situation with me that made this happen, and my siblings were kind of brought into it, and everyone knew about our home situation, like the secret that we all had. So it took time for me to recognize that it wasn't my fault, that I was a child. And just trying to maintain good relationships with everyone.
I was going to say, how's time impacted your relationship?
I have great relationships with everyone.
Yeah.
which is incredible.
So your dad, you wake up, one day, I don't think you'd seen him since you were 2 years old, and decide you want to reconnect. What made you make that decision?
I think it was getting to a place in my young adult life, as a professional, as an artist, and wanting to understand like who I am. And I think that it took like looking back and connecting with my father to really understand that and become like the person and the artist that I wanted to become. My oldest brother, Doug Jr., he was the one who reached out first and found him in Wisconsin. And I think it was maybe a year later that I called my brother and I said, like, I'm ready, like I want to meet him. So it was a beautiful, reunion, I guess. And me and my brother Doug, we both resemble him so much. So like the three of us, I felt like we're connected in a different way.
Because you'd never even seen a photo, right?
I'd seen very few, but it was like looking at my brother. It was mind-blowing.
And did the interest first start in your journal before actually reaching out?
I was journaling. I mean, that's something that I had done since I was very young, and I think as someone who didn't verbally express herself, that was my way of doing it. And so there was, a lot of journaling about, what that would look like in the anticipation and who we might be, and it was very fascinating.
How did the process of reconnecting compare to what you would have thought?
you imagine it's going to be like this Lifetime movie, I guess. And then I was going to have this like emotional kind of outburst, but it wasn't. It was meeting a stranger ultimately, and it took time to build an emotional bond and connection with him. But I would never take back going through that and eventually meeting him.
All right, I want to completely switch gears here now that I've grilled you about family life. I actually wanted to talk about Prince. What happens where one day somebody asks for your number and then that afternoon he's on the phone?
Yeah, it's pretty surreal. There's so many things in my life that happen that I'm just like, it's so crazy that it's like it was meant to be. I was at a point in my career, I'd been a soloist for a couple of years, and I was kind of at a standstill. Even thinking about my promotion, when Kevin McKenzie promoted me to soloist, there wasn't, from my memory, there wasn't this like huge excitement. It wasn't like, it was kind of like, I'm giving you this opportunity, like, it's time for you to step up and take it. But I didn't feel like a real sense of support, like, I believe in you and we're doing this. So, from the time I became a soloist, it was kind of like shaky, and I kind of felt on my own and trying to figure out what my future looked like and whether or not I really belonged in this world as a Black dancer.
Really?
Yeah, even, up until that point of being, I was only the second African-American female soloist to be promoted to that position in the company's history, but it still just felt, I just didn't feel like a big sense of like guidance in what it meant to be a soloist and work towards being a principal dancer. And then I got a call from someone asking if Prince could have my number. And none of it made sense to me. I was shocked, and I said okay. And I remember him calling while I was in the middle of a ballet class. And I knew he was going to be calling, and so like elusive. I had no idea when, like what that looked like. So I stepped out of class.
I was going to say, presumably that's one you step out for. Gilda, that was okay. No.
I was like, I'll be back. And I stepped out and I took the call from him, and he pretty much said, I've been looking for you for over a year, and I haven't been able to get in contact with you, which I was like, that's crazy. But he had remade the song Crimson and Clover, and he just had, when he has his mind set on something, like he is going to do it. And he envisioned me dancing in this video, and he ended up shooting the video with another dancer, and just thinking like, this isn't it. This isn't what I had envisioned. So finally connected, and within a couple of days, I was in LA, improvising on the set, and that was the start of this beautiful friendship that brought me to a better place of understanding like what I wanted out of my career. Which is why I was saying, like the timing was just so perfect. I ended up touring with him all over the world, and having that experience of someone that was such a creative genius that believed in me and was pushing me to explore my dance in a different way. It allowed me to become the artist that I am today.
And the touring started in Europe, and then it came stateside.
Yes.
Tell about those rehearsals at the IZAD in New Jersey.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Prince was great that he understood that ABT and my career as a ballerina, like that's my career. And it's amazing to have the opportunity to do these performances outside of ABT and also expose his audience to classical dance, maybe who didn't have interest or would never step into the Metropolitan Opera House. But I was in the midst of rehearsing for the Nutcracker for ABT when his performances were also going on in Jersey. So
talk about a grueling schedule.
It was unbelievable. I would finish rehearsing at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, and we'd finish like around 9 or 10, and then Prince would pick me up in a limo, and we'd drive to the IZAD, or wherever we were. Was it the IZAD in New Jersey? And and rehearse all night there for his shows, and then wake up in the morning and have my full day with ABT. You know, I was young, and these are sacrifices that I wanted to make because I could see the bigger picture.
And it's Prince.
Right. And it was an incredible experience, you know, performing at Madison Square Garden. And
what was it about that moment at MSG?
There was an energy and a connection with another artist on stage that I'd never experienced before. You know, someone of like his musical genius, and you know, he would do things in rehearsals that, you know, he wouldn't do, and he wouldn't do them in rehearsal, and then he would become this other person on stage that was unbelievable to see this person like blossom into this magnetic thing on stage, and to be a part of that, and to have him, you know, the first time that I came onto the stage for my solo and he introduced me, Misty Copeland, like to his audience, was just shocking. You know, I wasn't just a backup dancer for him. You know, it was a collaborative effort, and it really.
You're thinking what in that moment?
It shocked me. I like jumped out of my skin, and I had to like get back in my skin to finish performing, because I wasn't expecting for that type of acknowledgement or respect or introduction, and it was a beautiful moment.
And the impact he had on your self-confidence and understanding your self-worth was what?
To have another artist, again, of his caliber, kind of say to me, to acknowledge the power in being unique, which is like the opposite of what we're told in ballet. You know, it's like everyone's trying so hard to fit into this cookie cutter mold of what, you know, generations and generations of dancers have looked like, and trying to be that, and everyone trying to look the same and be this kind of uniform thing, especially as a corps de ballet dancer. And, you know, Prince was like, this is like, it's amazing. You're the only black woman in the company. Do you know what power that, you know, you have by like standing out and being different and being unique? And I never looked at myself that way. And as he gave me a sense of, confidence and empowerment that I'd never recognized before.
There was a New York Times article titled, "Where Are All the Black Swans?" And you said that it was the first article you ever read reflecting the heartbreak and the loneliness that you felt. How so?
There is a black ballet community out there. You know, I think that it was during that time that it was a little more, you know, Dance Theater of Harlem was not operating. They were on a 7-year hiatus. The black dance community, ballet community, was not as strong as it had been, and I felt like I didn't have a lot of that. I couldn't go to Dance Theater of Harlem and look at dancers that looked like me. There just wasn't that same community that was intact. And you know, when this article came out, I felt like it was the first time I was experiencing acknowledgement outside of the black dance community that this was an issue. To have it be recognized in such a concrete way, it just like opened the floodgates of all the things that I've been like, you know, that I have to hold inside in order to like keep it together every day and not, you know, be realistic maybe and think like, what will ever come of my career? Is this a reality for me? Instead, it was like convincing myself day in and day out that like this, yes, I can do this. I can maybe break the glass ceiling. And then this article came out, and it was just like, ugh, I don't know that it's ever going to happen for me. Why am I any more special than any black dancer that's come before me to be able to, you know, push through and become a principal dancer?
And then it was somebody you were friends with in the company whose reaction really had kind of a negative impact on you. Who didn't intend it that way, probably.
No, not at all. To have someone who doesn't maybe understand the pain and the realities around all the roadblocks for Black dancers, to read that article and think it was silly, or that it maybe wasn't accurate or true, was devastating. And it just kind of was a reflection of what I felt everyone at ABT was probably thinking, or everyone in the dance world, that didn't understand our history as Black dancers in the ballet world, the importance of our impact, and the fact that we're not given the same opportunities or access to be a part of this world. And that's a big problem.
Cindy once told you something about why a company rejected you, and it was important to you to save that letter for what purpose?
It was very interesting at a time when, I was auditioning for summer intensive programs. I think I was like 14 years old, and I did not have a lot of training under my belt. I had like a year and a half of ballet training under my belt. But every single school that I auditioned for, I was given a full scholarship to, except for one school. I wasn't even accepted. And
here in New York?
Yes. And a lot of these schools and companies have reputations for not being inclusive and not being diverse, and she just felt that it was important for me to remember, to remember and acknowledge that this had a lot to do with my race. But something to look back on and feel empowered in the future, which I do now. And also recognizing just the work that needs to be done, internally in the ballet community.
Which is what?
That, I think that a lot of it's happening right now. Within the pandemic, I've seen a big shift. But I think in order for us to rebuild and do the work, we need to be exposed. And I think that the ballet world comfortably has been able to live in this very white bubble, and there's no repercussions for their lack of support, acceptance, inclusion. And I think we're at a point where, people are speaking out and beyond me, and it shouldn't solely be coming from my voice. It should be a collective conversation that not just Black dancers are having, but dancers, period. The lack of diversity, the racism that still exists, even if it's these micro aggressions, having dancers of color not be allowed to wear tights that are their skin color, that they're being forced in order to fit into a company environment. You have to wear pink tights and pink ballet slippers, what representative of a white person's skin. Or you don't have the right hair texture to put into these hairstyles, so therefore, we're not gonna accept you in this company. Things like that have gone on for far too long and need to be addressed and changed.
There was a situation where you were playing a part in, I believe, Sleeping Beauty?
Yeah.
And the makeup person's coming over with white powder.
Right.
What was it about that made you decide to finally kind of take a stand?
I think it was, coming to a place where I felt starting to feel comfortable in my skin and with who I wanted to be, especially when you're on stage and you're a role model, and you're, all these young kids in general, but Black and brown kids looking at you, and they should be able to tell that you're Black when you're on stage. And I just hit my limit, I guess. And I turned to the makeup artist and I said, why do I have to be a white cat? I was playing the role of Puss in Boots in Sleeping Beauty, and she just kind of looked at me and she was like, I guess you don't. And so we made myself a brown cat. And it was a small, like, kind of silly step, but it wasn't
really small. Yeah.
It wasn't. And these are conversations that I've continued to have throughout my career, where we're really kind of dissecting or like understanding, deciphering what these things mean. Like, when you play a role as like a Willie in Giselle or a Swan in Swan Lake, why do we have to paint our skin white? Like, I understand the idea of, wanting to take away the shine so that you look otherworldly or like an animal or whatever it is, but that doesn't mean you have to be white. So I've had these conversations and small adjustments are made, and they're ongoing conversations that are still happening today.
When the Dance Theater of Harlem was first pursuing you, what was it about thinking about your mom that made you decide to stick with your trajectory?
Yeah, the thought of watching this, this pattern from my mother of running away and starting a new situation that ended up with the same issues because they were never dealt with. There was something about that was triggered in me when I thought about leaving ABT and going to Dance Theater of Harlem. Am I just running away so that things are going to be easier for me because I'm surrounded by other Black dancers? Or do I stay and really get to the root of the issue? How do we make changes, systemic changes in the classical ballet world where a Black dancer can be in a white majority company?
The impact that you'd like your success to have had on people of color would be what?
I think that, within our history in America, I think often Black people, Black women are kind of pinned against each other. And we're in situations where there's one opening, one position for a dancer of color in a company. And it just doesn't create an environment that, is for us to support one another. And I think that we're at a place where we have to really come together and have the same mission in mind. And for me, I'm always thinking about opportunities for Black dancers, using my voice and my platform to call out companies that aren't, taking these things into account and that should be. But I think it's important that we create a different system in that the next generation of Black and brown dancers feel a supportive environment around them coming into this space.
And in the remaining couple minutes we have, as you look to the next chapter for yourself, there are all these kind of extensions of you that you're creating to help in progressing that, whether the foundation or production company, et cetera. On the foundation front, what are your goals with that?
Yeah, my intentions with creating a foundation are, like you were saying, everything that I'm a part of, it's all connected to dance, and all with the same mission and goal in mind. It's to bring more diversity and equity to ballet. It's to expose young people that don't have the means to be a part of it, don't have the access, don't have maybe the support, or their families or caretakers, whoever, don't have an understanding of this world, but that it can be an outlet. It can be a way of developing tools and becoming better citizens in their society and their communities, bringing people together. That dance is that should be a part of everyone's lives. And I think there's something particularly incredible about ballet, and it just hasn't been something that's been open to all communities. And so, through the foundation, it's social justice through dance, and to be able to create our first program, the Be Bold program, which stands for Ballet Explorations. Ballet offers leadership development. To have that our first kind of run of the program be at a Boys and Girls Club, at 5 Boys and Girls Clubs in the Bronx, a free ballet class in that after school period, such a vital time for children. It's like a full circle moment.
And then with the production company, I was talking to Layla yesterday, and first, it's amazing some of the people that have had ballet in their lives. Let me see, Billie Eilish, Penelope Cruz, Charlize Theron, Rahm Emanuel, among others. But you're trying to accomplish what with kind of the media extension?
Yeah, we were talking earlier just about the opportunity to bring dance to more people. the reach you have through film and television, or on social media, but this visual art form, that you shouldn't just have to be in a theater to experience that, and to be able to tell stories of artists that we should know about and we don't. That was one thing that we were really looking to do, to give opportunity to dancers. Why do we make dance films and tell stories and not use real dancers? It's a real missed opportunity. But just to give, to show more people, to expose more people to dance, and for me, ballet in particular.
And lastly, if you view your life in kind of decade chunks, life's changed a lot for you over the past 10 years. You go 10 years before that, it's obviously changed a lot. 10 years from now, where would you like to see yourself? To continue on with the same mission, with everything that I'm a part of, whether it's Life in Motion Productions, whether it's the books, it's amazing to be at a place as an entrepreneur and to be a founder in Greatness Wins, and this athletic wear brand with other athletes who understand, to have been in similar positions, and it's all kind of aligned with exposing, bringing more exposure of, dance to more people, showing that dancers are athletes and deserve to be in a position of getting endorsement deals and the respect. I'll forever be a part of dance, and bringing it to different communities, but I think just showing the power and beauty of dance, and how it can heal people and bring people together. I should ask too, the motivation behind writing the 8th book.
Yeah, the motivation behind, yes, my 8th book.
Which is,
I know,
remarkable.
It's crazy.
And how you even have the time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but the wind at my back, it was really, the relationship with my mentor, Raven Wilkinson, who was the first Black ballerina in a major ballet company, the Ballet Russe in Monte Carlo, in the 1950s. Getting to know her, finding out she lives a block away from me. I don't know how many years ago that was now when we met for the first time, but having her come into my life and show me what it really means to have, passion and perseverance, and want to stay connected to this art form, even with all the extreme hate she experienced, being chased out of her company by the KKK, her life being threatened, her career being cut short in America. But to get to know her and to develop this relationship, and her giving me a renewed sense of purpose in my career. So this is the story, it's her story, it's my story, and how they kind of collide. And I don't think I'd be in this position and be a principal dancer, be the person I am, without that relationship in my life.
And you can find out how your husband proposed too.
Yes.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.